So, thank you for that, Lee-Eric. Hello, everyone. It's fun to see you all here. My favorite part of this is when I walk in for the first time and see all the people that have been nominated and agreed to the process, and it always gets me excited because there's always people in the room that I know, that I love, that I believe in as leaders. And so yeah, as Lee-Eric said, this is a discovery process. Nobody's locking in to any long-term 40-year commitment or anything. It may end up being that for some of you, or it may be just an enrichment season that also provides opportunity to get to know some other folks around the table. But my assignment today is to reinforce, I think, what most of you have already read in Every Good Endeavor, which is a wonderful book that was co-written by Tim Keller and Catherine Alsdorf out of Redeemer Presbyterian Church. Our Nashville Institute for Faith and Work is actually, got its inspiration from the Center for Faith and Work at New York's Redeemer Presbyterian, where Patty and the girls and I were before coming to Nashville. And really neat story about how NIFW formed. It happened about 3 or 4 years prior to the plan, because Missy Wallace just showed up and had this thing brewing in her heart, completely separate from all the things that we had brewing in ours. And she said, I'm gonna get sidetracked if I tell you the whole story. But it was a real God thing. Missy did a fabulous job founding, establishing NIFW, and then Rosewind Brooks was her successor for a season, and now Josiah Lurenberger and a wonderful team around him. I'm sure you've met Lauren Brett, Paul Lim, and I know Debbie Pixley is doing a lot of, she's almost like a staff member because of all the time and investment she puts into it. In any event, that's a little bit of the background of what got us here. And one thing that I think is really worth asking when we think about Christian discipleship is a question about the stewardship of our time, especially all of our waking hours, right? Because the scriptures tell us whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all to the glory of God, knowing it's the Lord Jesus Christ you're serving. There are scriptures in the New Testament especially that where the Apostle Paul especially urges believers to see their work as a realm of discipleship and as a realm or a sphere of faithfulness and a way to serve the world. And so just imagine if 40 to 60 hours of your week, let's say, whether you work for a paycheck, whether you are a full-time parent, we're all vocational people, we're all doing stuff, right? And what if somebody were to say, those 40 to 60 hours of your week really kind of need to be bifurcated from your faith. They need to sort of be separate, compartmentalized. Faith and work really don't dance well together. What if 40 to 60 hours of your waking time each and every week went untouched by your relationship with Christ? That, we believe, would be a travesty. And so, whether you're an executive, a homemaker, a student, whether you work for pay or whether your work is on a volunteer basis or otherwise, we are vocational beings. And so my job tonight is just to give a little bit of an overview, which again should reinforce a lot of the stuff that you've already read, of the theological, ecclesiastical, and missional emphases of faith and work integration. And I'm going to spend more time on the theological part because I'm a Presbyterian. And then we'll do a little bit ecclesiastical, which has to do with the church, and then missional. So we know this from the very beginning, that human beings were created in the image of God. In the image of God, He created them, male and female. He created them, and at creation, we see the Spirit of God hovering over this vastness, and then suddenly, God starts speaking, and people and places and things start emerging into existence. And then once Adam is created and Eve, he offers what we have called the first Great Commission. Of course, we know the Great Commission from Jesus in Matthew 28 as his, as his command as disciples to go out and make more disciples. But there was a commission, a Great Commission, long before that. And that's when God said to Adam and to Eve, tend my garden. Take the raw material that I've put in front of you in creation and develop it. Be miniature, theologians would say vice regents. Be little kings and little queens exercising dominion over creation. And so they got to work. And the garden is a bit of a metaphor for all work, because the garden involves both creative work and redemptive, restorative work, which we'll get to in a minute. But bottom line, work is an essential piece of human flourishing. To retire at age 40 and not have some contribution to make will hurt you because it's not in your wiring to not be a vocational being when you have the capacity to. And we hear a lot of times when people retire, at 65, 70 or whatever, they still want to find something to do that's meaningful with their time, that contributes, etc. That's because we're made that way. We're in the image of God. And the very first thing that God reveals to us about himself is that he worked. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, God made stuff. So it's also, I think a really inspiring observation that I think Tim and Catherine touch on in the book, that history began in a garden and it ends in a city. Begins in a garden, ends in a city. The development of the Garden of Eden, Genesis 1, 2, 3. The last couple chapters of Revelation, a city, holy city comes down out of heaven from God with a tree in the middle and a garden in the middle, and so you got this garden city, which is a lot like New York City, right? The kind of the park in the middle, and then all this hustle and bustle, etc. So, and Nashville as well. We got a river running through our city. But ever since the fall, we have been called, we've continually been called to still express the image of God in our lives through creative, developmental, and redemptive endeavors. And so whether you're, well, I'll get to this in a minute, but we have creative professions, for instance. Think about work in the two categories of creating and redeeming or restoring. So creative professions, what would be some creative professions where you take the raw material of something and then you make something out of that? Artists, okay. Musicians, okay. They take the raw material of sound and notes and so on and assemble them together, make something beautiful. Construction, excellent. A little bit of that going on in our city. Landscaping, yes. Is that what you're going to say, Hal?
Some days.
What's that?
Some days.
Some days, yes. Some days creative, some days completely destructive. Uprooting stuff that's no longer wanted. Somebody else said something over here?
It was actually landscaping.
Landscaping, okay. You get the drift. This adds value. This moves history forward just a little bit more, every creative endeavor, toward that city that will come down out of heaven. So how about restorative work or redemptive work? How's that different than creative work?
It's going to be more fixing something that's broken.
Okay, taking something that has somehow been damaged, somehow been tarnished, somehow been made less than what it's meant to be, and restoring it, okay? That's part of our mission statement, loving people, places, and things to life. Sometimes people, places, and things have lost vitality and lost life and become tired and weary, and that's restorative work. So therapists, healthcare professionals, law enforcement, maintenance and repair, home renovation to go along with construction, right? Pastors, yes. We create, we restore, and we are also a hot mess all at the same time. We need restoration. So human dignity. I just talked a little bit about human design. We're designed to work. But it also says a lot about our dignity when God says, I want you to participate in my work by working in these various ways. And so one thing I want to say is, whatever you're doing, maybe you're a carpenter like Jesus was, maybe you're an educator also like Jesus was, maybe you're a physician also like Jesus was. Like Jesus identified with all these different professions, right? Maybe you're maintenance or repair like Jesus was. He came to fix a big mess and heal a big mess. Whatever your work, whether it's any of these things, what I'm here to do tonight is to stir your redemptive imagination for what you do, and to draw out the value that is already there, the redemptive restorative value that is already there in what you do. We forgot to mention finance. That's very important as well. Economies matter to God. The last thing God said in the book of Jonah is, should I not care for these 120,000 people and also much cattle? That was their economy. It was an agrarian economy. So every endeavor that's good, in other words, that's not profane, right? We're not talking about pornography, trafficking human people, enslaving human, we're not talking about profane professions. We're talking about good, creative, and restorative professions, is as much God's work as the work of a missionary or a pastor. It is. And I'm here to try to convince you of that if you maybe doubt it. Everyone that has a job to do, whether it's volunteer, whether it's at home domestic, or whether it's out of the home and for pay, if it's creative, restorative, or both, you are a professional Christian. You are a professional Christian. There's no job that is so Christian that it's more Christian than another. There's no good endeavor that is so insignificant that it's inferior to another. So where do I get that? Well, there's a principle that Jesus made a point of putting out there for us, and that is that the first will be last and the last will be first. We talk about the upside down kingdom sometimes from our pulpit, and how God just thinks very differently than we do. Otherwise, why wasn't Jesus a political Messiah like everybody wanted him to be? Why did he why was he a poor guy? Why did he choose to live in homelessness and poverty and loneliness and so on, and patching together blue-collar jobs to make a living, and while also being financially dependent on donors? Why did he choose that humble existence, if not to communicate the King of Kings and Lord of Lords thinks differently about what job and what work is significant and what is not? His half-brother James wrote in the Epistle of James, the one in humble circumstances should take pride in his high position, and the rich should take pride in his low position. So what does this mean? If I'm a blue-collar worker, let's say, or maybe I'm a disabled veteran, and my work is something like, I don't know, putting stamps on letters or something like that, I may actually rule in glory over the current sitting President of the United States. And if I'm the current sitting President of the United States, I might be washing and cleaning, the floors and shining the shoes for somebody who goes unnoticed, in the local schoolyard, in the work that they do, or wherever they are. I remember one Thanksgiving, Patty and I were visiting her parents, and every other year they would do Thanksgiving with this couple who did blue-collar work. And I remember having a conversation with the man. His name was Joe. And I said, And he started it, right? I never initiate with a question because of what I do, but his question was, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a pastor." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then I said, "Well, how about you? What's your work?" And he said, "I just push a broom." And I thought to myself, "Just?" Who taught him? Who sent signals to him that his work was just something? What would the world be like without janitorial work? If just all janitorial work disappeared? Or let's say, what would the world be like without maternal work? Without the work of mothers, who, it's I think the biggest profession in the world and possibly the most overlooked. You get my drift? And so it troubled me. And then I heard a story not long after that where, somebody told me a story about John F. Kennedy. He was, down at Cape Canaveral. They were about to send the first rocket to the moon, right? And he's walking the halls with his entourage, and there's this janitor, another janitor, sweeping the floors, and the president, reaches out his hand and says, "I'm Jack Kennedy. Big day for all of us. What is it that you do here?" And the janitor said, "Well, I'm doing the same thing that you're doing here, sir. I'm launching a rocket." And there's something really meaningful and true and glorious and right in that perspective. And we want you to have that kind of perspective about what you do. You have a friend who all his life he dreamed of being a surgeon. It's one of our New York friends. And for various reasons, he ended up choosing not to go to medical school, and ended up being a hospital administrator. And he kind of felt like a failure for a while, that he didn't achieve the dream that he'd always had, and yet he wanted to be in the atmosphere of medical and healthcare work. And then he was exposed to some of this teaching from the likes of Tim and Catherine, and realized, wait a minute, I am part of this effort. I am essential to this effort. We're all essential to this effort. It's like the body of Christ. The eye can't say to the hand, "I don't need you." We're interdependent and called to work and serve together as a body, not only in the church but in the world and in the workplace. And so every bit of work, every bit of good work is a glory thing. And what we're hopeful is that your imagination will be kindled for the good work that you do and the good work that others do. It's a dignity thing. And then it's also a satisfaction thing. And that's the third sort of theological leg of the stool. It is good to experience joy in our work. The creation days when God, looked back after each day, it says that God looked at what He'd made, and He said it was good. And then at the end, not after creating Adam, but after creating the woman, He said it's very good, right? So He looks back on all He's made, and He makes this superlative statement: it is very good. He was pleased. Isaiah 53 forecasts the work that Jesus will do on the cross. And it says this: after Jesus, the suffering servant, suffers, after He justifies many through the good and necessary work of His perfect life and sacrificial death, it says this: He will see the light of life and be satisfied. Hebrews chapter 12, a very well-known verse in the New Testament, says, "For the joy that was set before Him, Jesus endured." He endured the toil and the labor and the grit and the suffering and sorrow of the cross for the joy set before him. So that he knew that at a future time he would look back and again be satisfied with the fruit of his hard labor and toil. We too are wired for vocational delight. That is why so many of the world's pain points are connected to work, because just like family relationships and other relationships, most of our pain points are tied to the things that God established in creation as essential for image bearing and essential for flourishing. Vocational life, relational life. God established these things for our flourishing. And so when they go wrong, when they're off, we hurt more than we hurt when, a tree falls in the woods. Unless we're like a tree person, right? And trees are our business, or trees are our thing. So Dorothy Sayers, one of the quotes from the essay, the first thing the church should tell a carpenter is to make excellent tables. She talks about how we've wrongly compartmentalized, faith and vocation, and she's trying to reclaim that. And she says, could you imagine a shoddy table ever coming out of the carpenter's shop in Nazareth? Probably not. And then there's the capstone, which is the Sabbath. God rested after 6 days of work, and he invites us to rest as well. I mean, what kind of God is it that would actually command that his people rest? What's that?
A loving God.
A loving God, right? And how we resist his love sometimes in this. God rests after his work. So here's a little bit of a twist, right? And there's a lot of gospel in this, right? There are 10 commandments, and the one that gets the most press is number 4. It gets more words, and usually when it gets more words, that means God's trying to get our attention. It's like a handful of exclamation points after the command, because he really unpacks it. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not kill. Sabbath. Okay? Why is it? Why is it that God puts such great emphasis on it? Anne Lamott put it this way: almost everything will work again if you unplug it, including you. There is, Marva Dawn called Sabbath a holy waste of time. It is good to waste time, to use it, to spend it doing nothing. Why do you think that God created sleep? Just to remind us in our day-to-day rhythm how dependent we are on the one who says he neither slumbers nor sleeps. Like he's at work when we're out cold. He's always at work, and Sabbath is essentially an invitation to sleep while you're awake, to receive the rest of God, to receive the rest of Christ, chiefly through life together with the community of God, directing our attention to the Lord through worship, through psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, and scripture readings and prayers and sermons and feasting together and so on. Is in a manner of speaking, a way to sleep while we are awake, in the same way that we sleep while we sleep during the other days of the week. But here's something that I never noticed until about 10 years ago, and that is that God's week starts with 6 days of work, and then ends with a 7th day of rest. But that 7th day then becomes the first full day of our week. God works unto rest so that we can rest unto our work. His last day is our first day. There's a ton that could be drawn out of that, just theologically and concerning the gospel, but in any event, it's an invitation to unplug from what Eugene Peterson called the anxiety system of Pharaoh, which I think the words anxiety system probably resonate with most of us on some level. Okay, very quickly, ecclesiastical. In the church, what is the win on this stuff? It's simply this: people who get more motivated by their work because God's in it. Like if your imagination gets kindled where you get to the point where even the job that you're not crazy about, you start to sense and believe and receive by faith that it has meaning, because there is creative and there is redemptive, restorative capacity and contribution to it. That's it. And so if your imagination is moving in that direction, then it's a win. This teaching has accomplished what it's intended to accomplish. And then if you start engaging your work and encouraging others to do the same, along these lines, wonderful. Then finally, there's a missional component, right? There's a component of blessing the world through our work and through our perspective on work. And the way we've set up NIFW, the Nashville Institute for Faith and Work, we want to ensure that as many Christ Pres folks as possible have access to the vocational discipleship pathways that are provided there. There's a shorter term one, about 12 weeks or so, in the form of videos and small group Bible studies and stuff. And then there's a longer, what we call Gotham Intensive. I think, were you in the first class, Emily, or the second one? Third? Okay. Yeah, and Georgia, y'all were together. Well, Patty was in your group too, right? Okay, yeah. So, all the years run together for me. But thumbs up on that? Yeah. So Gotham is more like a 6 to 9 month intensive where you really drill down on this stuff with a lot of deep reading, rich community with a smaller cohort of people, and it's just very meaningful. But what we've done intentionally is we've always left 50% of the spaces for people who don't go to Christ Pres, but who are part of other churches, not to recruit them and reel them in. It's quite the opposite. We want to send people back with this training into their churches with resources to maybe start classes and small groups and other opportunities for others at other churches around Nashville to experience the vocational aspect of discipleship with the resources that we've created and provided. Because most churches can't afford an entire center or organization for faith and work integration, but we want to make sure that church plants and small to mid-sized churches with leaner budgets don't lose the opportunity or don't go without the opportunity, as far as we're concerned, to lean into this stuff if they so desire. So we like to share this stuff. So I'll leave you with a few scriptures and then land the plane and pass it on to Lee Eric, or we can talk about whatever stirs your imagination here. Jonah 4, I've already mentioned it. The very last statement that the Lord makes to the grumpy prophet Jonah is, shall I not care for all these people in this great city, 120,000 people, and also much cattle, period. End of Jonah. Cattle is the last word in the book of Jonah, and again, that was their economy in Nineveh. They built their economy was agrarian. John 3:16. So here's a little tidbit that might blow your mind. John 3:16 says, "God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, whosoever shall believe in Him shall not perish but have everlasting life." The word in the Greek for world is cosmos. God so loved the universe. God so loved people, places, and things everywhere that He gave. Romans 8 tells us that Jesus was sent to redeem and restore people, but not at all to stop there. We are the crown of creation, but He came to redeem and restore all of creation. And if you look at the middle section of Romans chapter 8, it talks about how all of creation groans in eager expectation for the glorious freedom of the children of God. And essentially what he's saying is that when Jesus returns, the first thing that's going to be united is the perfecting of God's people. We will become like Christ because we will see Jesus as He is in our resurrected state. And then right after that, the rest of creation will follow redeemed humanity in becoming glorious and perfect. I have no idea how to describe what that's going to look like or feel like. All that we know is that God's redemption does not stop with human beings, it starts. Like creation ends with human beings, redemption starts with human beings, and then the rest of creation will follow. Imagine a life without weeds. Imagine a life where you'll never fall down on the ice again. Where every day you and everything and everyone around you feels younger, stronger, smarter, all the things for the next day and then the next day for eternity. When it says in Revelation 21, which pictures Jesus in the new heaven and the new earth, it says, "Behold, I am making all things new." And the verb form there is continual, which means every day is going to be newer than the day before forever. I mean, it kind of blow your mind if you think about that. Romans chapter 8 already talked about that. All creation is pregnant with glory. And then the Lord's Prayer. What do we do with all this stuff now? Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. N.T. Wright talks about hope, and he says that hope is imagining God's future into the present and then acting on your imagination. And work has such a significant part to play in that. So that's the teaching for tonight. And we can let's call it a night, or we can talk about it.
Oh, we can't call it a night. I've got you guys for at least 15, 20 more minutes.
Okay.
So let's, what questions do you have, either questions or observations for Scott that you would like to bring up for the group right now? Does anyone have something? Don't be bashful. I'm going to get you to talk one way or another.
Well, my question would be, in the book that Lady writes, I think she has a unique perspective coming out of World War II. I think that was a really unique time, I think, in history. And I think it created an urgency, both in the world. I'm not going to use that. No, I'm not going to use that. That's okay. It created urgency in the world and the community. And I think that's where the challenge, I think, in church is to create that urgency about a message on a individual level. And I've always embraced that in small groups because I know that's what saved my marriage. So I think that's what I always urge men to do, is to find that in their life, because I think what I try to get them to see is there's a train coming that you don't know what time it's going to come to the terminal. And you may not even know it's arrived until somebody hits you in the face. So, I don't know how that parlays to other areas, but I think that's what I always miss in church, is that I don't sense that people have a sense of urgency, that there's something that really needs to be done now.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't think that you create another Hitler or anything like that to do that, but I think there's ways that we share our own journeys that can help people to maybe connect that with themselves, because it's all a relative scale of one man's mountain is another man's molehill, so to speak. But that's really what I liked about the material. Not to mention that I am a self-professed workaholic, so I love anything that would rationalize working a little more. Would certainly be right up my alley. So I definitely didn't want my wife to see this book, because she would not like the concepts in this book. But I just wonder what your take on that was, and how you convey that to, a congregation, a group of people, a small group of people. I don't know, but that's what I found so impactful about it. Is I wish there was more of that sense of urgency that we were able to embrace throughout church.
Yeah, that sense of urgency, at least anecdotally in observation, becomes more apparent the older people get, or the more desperate people are in their circumstances. God has a way of, putting a smelling salt, under our noses, either in adversity or as we, become more and more aware of our mortality. Now, when you go to other parts of the world where persecution is a daily thing, or where poverty is the norm, it's very different. And those who do global work and travel the world, back and forth between the developed world and less developed world, will say, without exception, the communities around the world that have the most joy are the ones who have the least. And there's some kind of dance that happens between adversity and joy, where you really can't have one without the other in the truest and deepest sense. You can have happiness and comfort, but that's not necessarily joy, because happiness and comfort are more circumstantially based. But I don't know if that helps with your question, but that's all I got. So.
Someone else? Comment, question, observation?
Scott, would you speak to, and you hit on a little bit in Every Good Endeavor where it talks about the Sabbath, and you triggered something, I remember, where it compared leisure versus rest. What's your perspective?
My perspective is listen to what Tim and Catherine say on leisure versus rest. Yeah, leisure, I think, might be less thought out and be experienced or interpreted as less purposeful, kind of passing time. Whereas rest, there's an intentionality to it. It might involve a reading program or a very well-defined regimen of sleep, of discipline, of rhythms that aren't necessarily always there with leisure, unless you have season tickets to the Titans or something, and then you have a rhythm. But and you can have rest and leisure simultaneously. Does that help, Randy?
Does.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
I will say this, and probably won't be the last time I say this. At the end of this training, for those of you that stick with it all the way to the end, which I hope is all of you, always ask a question: what exceptions do you take with what's in the Westminster Confession? And inevitably, whenever I've been in front of any ordination exam for either ministers or for elders, there's always one that's brought up, and that has to do with the Sabbath. So there is a little bit of leeway insofar as that's concerned. The language of the Westminster Confession is pretty strict when it comes to Sabbath. So our ministers or our candidates for ordination will often say, that is my one exception. There's usually two. I'll get into that one later. But the one in terms of has to do with the distinction between leisure and recreation. So think about that, especially when you get to that section of the Westminster Confession, and try and articulate your thoughts on that, because we're going to ask you to detail that. Any exceptions that you have to the Westminster, and there should be precious few, one or two, and that's usually one of them. And again, when you also think about what Sabbath is, there's this image where we don't work for our salvation. We rest. We trust in His provision for us. And so what is it that you're communicating when you engage in Sabbath rest? Are you doing something to provide for yourself, to work for yourself, to provide you a means of sustaining yourself? Because that's what the Lord is trying to tell you. Rest in my work. Rest in my work. And the Sabbath is a weekly reminder of that we rest in His work. We don't provide for ourselves. We don't earn our salvation. We rest in His work, in the work that He's done for us. And so what's the activity you're doing in Sabbath? Is it reflective of providing for myself or resting in His work? There's a number of ways you can answer that, and it can fit within that answer within the Westminster Confession. So, someone else, thoughts, questions, comments for Scott, specifically. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, one of the hardest. Oh, thank you. One of the hardest, but I think most helpful phrases was this concept of communal egotism. So in the Dorothy Sayers article, it talks a little bit about don't serve the community, but serve the work. Mm-hmm. How does that pair when you think about restorative work, right? Because obviously, I'm in nonprofit work, but teaching and there's so much where I feel like my job is to honestly ensure serve the community, right? Work specifically. So I was challenged by that. I think I agree with the concept that I need to be excellent at the work that I do, right? Because that's what God's calling, and that it can be dangerous to just fall to kind of a groupthink mentality. So I get that concept, like just doing what people want, not what they need. And yet, like, how do we, in the restorative work, cross that boundary and understand how those two things fit together?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Scott. I think that the way I would parse it out is there is the work we do, and then there's the byproduct. And I think what Dorothy Sayers is saying is, as much as possible, let's keep our eyes off the byproduct and on the work that when done well, makes the byproduct more likely. Right? If you're an educator who doesn't invest much in your work, but you're really kind to the students and go out to dinner with them and have personal relationship, the work isn't being accomplished. The byproduct isn't happening. But if you're fixated on, educating holistically, those relationships will emerge, and that mutual honor and respect will emerge as well as a byproduct, right? It's kind of like when C.S. Lewis says, aim at heaven and you get earth thrown in, aim at earth and you get neither. Maybe aim at doing your work with all your heart, with as much excellence as you can, and you get outcomes thrown in. But if you aim at the outcomes, you get neither, right? So like if let's say, and that's also a safeguard from despair. Like, I think of people who work in pharmaceuticals, right, and they're trying to discover a cure for something, and let's say all these dear people. My mom died from Alzheimer's. She suffered from it for 10 years. It's the worst disease ever. I still can't think of a single good thing to say about Alzheimer's, right? And so I'm so thankful for people who are in that field of research. They haven't found the cure yet, and so you have all these people spending entire careers, fighting a fight that from a temporal perspective, they end up losing. And yet maybe, it's the leaf by niggle thing, right? And maybe, my role is to move the ball an inch in a 1 mile race, a 1 mile collective shared race to find a cure to this thing. But if I'm really zeroed in and focused, maybe I could even move it an inch and a half, Like it's just that bigger kind of perspective and imagination that doing great work with all of our hearts, as best we know how, is faithfulness. The byproduct is the work of God, right? Like I planted, Paul says, Apollos watered, but God made things grow. And so Paul's focus was on planting, Apollos's focus was on watering. Those farmer metaphors, God brought the increase. And yet, God gives a degree of dignity to Paul and Apollos where the growth wouldn't have happened had they not planted and watered, right? And so he's involving them in the work while relieving them of the pressure to accomplish the outcomes. The gospel is all about relieving us of pressure so that we can enter into the joy as he carries the burden on his shoulders. Does that make sense? So, I don't know, that's a lot of gobbledygook, but I hope there's something in there that's
There's a verse I really
helpful.
like with that I've always liked about that concept. Ecclesiastes 9:10, whatever your hands set to do it with all your might. That's always one that I like too,
Yeah.
from that perspective. And and I took it as being focused.
Yeah.
And not get distracted with, even though these praises may come and
Mhm.
these things may seem nice, they weren't really what I was setting out to do. Which can be confusing for me in business sometimes, because as I become successful, I think some people have thought that I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I have to sort of humble
Yeah.
myself and remember that I didn't actually
That's right.
set out to do that. That
That's
was
right.
just an unfortunate thing.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in thinking that I did
Yeah.
have that figured out.
Here's another example. So I've got some, not like life-threatening, but I've got some artery blockage. right? And I have been a jock all my life. My resting heart rate is 51 beats a minute. You know, like I've been fit all my life. And, you know, I have these symptoms, get it checked, and the doctor says, yeah, we found something. I'm like, are you serious? And he's like, oh, it's worse than that. He says, there are 450-pound truck drivers that have perfect, perfect arteries and, perfect cardiovascular systems that live to 95. And I'm like, that's not fair. But the doctor's message is like, hey, the ball that you need to keep your eye on is healthy practices. Exercise, diet, etc. That's all you need to think about. Let me worry about the outcomes. Let me worry about, your long-term scenarios and risk reduction and all that. You focus on these three things. And I think our work is a little bit like that as well, right? I mean, ministry's like that, right, Lyric? Like, it can be a grind. You can pour your heart into it. And Tom Douglas has got, anybody seen Tom Douglas's documentary called Love, Tom? Oh my gosh. Okay, so Greg, pretty great, right? Who has Paramount Plus? Okay, just get the free Paramount Plus. You get it for a week for free. Watch Love, Tom. No, watch Love, Tom, but there's this song, you can get it on Spotify too, but it's more powerful when you see it. It's called Van Gogh. And I'll close with this. I'm gonna look up the lyrics of Van Gogh, and this is a great. I don't know why I didn't think about this. This is me on the fly. Sorry, y'all. Tom Douglas, Van Gogh is the name of the song. So, lyrics. It's short. Okay. Songwriters, Georgia, you'll relate to this. You pour your heart out on a page. You bare your soul up on the stage. You got the power to make us feel. You got the power to help us heal. You're not crazy if it hurts and makes you cry. Draw the beauty from your pain. Life is just too beautiful to put it in a frame. Maybe that's the reason why Van Gogh went insane. You offer up your best and it don't sell. Cuts you to the bone and hurts like hell. Promise me you'll still give your fragile heart. You and I both know, baby, it's still a work of art. And you're not crazy if it hurts and makes you cry. Draw the beauty from your pain. Life is just too beautiful to put it in a frame. Maybe that's the reason why Marilyn went insane. You can taste the colors, you can feel them down so deep. Don't worry about the others if it doesn't make them weep. Remember, outcomes. Don't worry about the outcomes. I hope it always hurts and makes you cry. Draw the beauty from your pain. Life is just too beautiful to put it in a frame. Maybe that's the reason why Elvis went insane. Oh, baby, come in from the rain. No. Finish with that.
That is a great note to end on. Thank you.
And that is somebody who went through this training some time ago. So maybe you'll write a song like that
Maybe.
someday.
Don't hold your breath. Okay, with that, we'll put a pin in that. This is what our homework is for next week. So
important for me to know that I don't make any money off of this. Okay,
I do. No,
one of my non-negotiables with publishers is I don't make a dime off my church with books, which is why we never do book events or anything. This is important for me that you know that.
Thanks, Scott.
All right. So what I want you to do is make sure you have this read by next week. And we're going to start off our time next week. Since we won't have to do introductions and things like that, I'm going to look for at least 2 people to present 5-minute concisely, 1 chapter from the book. Just give me a 5-minute summary, and I'll even start a clock at 5 minutes. I don't want it to be longer than 5 minutes. A 5-minute summary of 2 chapters, 1 chapter each. So 2 of you to do 1 chapter. So I want volunteers. Who can I get to do? Let's start. 1 from part 1 and 1 from part 2. Chapter 3, personal faith or institutional church. Who wants to be the one to provide a 5-minute summary for that chapter?
I'll do it.
All right, Randy. Okay, 1 from chapter 2. It's going to be a tough one. Oh, you want it? You don't even know what I'm going to ask you there. Kyle, you got it.
Hey,
you're going to throw it out there anyway. I mean, I haven't read it yet, so it won't matter whether it's
Chapter 10, chastity or sexual freedom. That's yours. That's the one you're getting. I told you may want to hear what I said. So those are two particularly good chapters. It's all good. It's all very good. Would you rather do red state, blue state?
So what was that? I just missed.
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10.
Yeah. Chastity or sexual freedom. Okay.
Chapter 3, institutional, what was it?
Yeah, chapter 3, of course, let's see. Personal faith or institutional church. It's an important one. I think it's an important, especially as leaders, in encouraging people. Why church? Isn't my faith a personal thing? It's a really important question to wrestle with. Okay.
So we're all still reading it. It's just that they're
All still reading it. Don't be, and then also be prepared to just within the table that you're at to discuss something that impressed you, something that you can walk away with, something that you want to share with the rest of the group. But those two in particular will be 5-minute. And everyone's going to get a chance to do this, so don't feel like, oh, I escaped that. No, we're going to do this every week, okay, with different people. And please don't feel the pressure of it. It's really not as bad as you think. Second thing, plenty of food left in there. I've left to-go packages out, so if you want to take a to-go box for whatever reason for lunch tomorrow, please do that on the way out, okay? Let me close this in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, again, we thank you for just the joy that it is to be together and wrestle with these things. We ask that as we continue in this training, that you would challenge us, that you would stretch us, and that ultimately you would mold us into the image of your Son, Jesus Christ, a little bit at a time, so that we can then take that out to a world that needs to know Jesus. Be with us and go with us now. Thank you for this time we had together, and it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Good night, folks. Look, a little early. That's 7 minutes early. Yeah.